Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Beth Schumann. I'm the Director of American Friends of Combatants for Peace, and welcome to our workshop and conversation about theater of the oppressed and the way in which theater can be used as a tool of activism, and the way in which Combatants for Peace has used theater as a form of activism for social and progressive change, and the way theater has been used around the world through this modality, theater of the oppressed. So we're here today with American Friends of Combatants for Peace board member, Gili Getz, who is also an actor and activist, and Combatants for Peace founder, and I'm not sure your official title these days, Chen, but he was longtime member, founder, and really created the whole theater program for Combatants for Peace these last 15 years or so. So we're going to start the talk today. Chen has prepared a presentation for you, and then feel free to put your questions in the chat box. If you direct them to me or to me, Beth, or to Gili, that would be best. And then Gili is going to be leading a Q&A using your chat box questions with Chen for the last 20 or 25 minutes or so of the talk. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. And there you go.
Okay, just a second. Okay, so hi everyone. Here it's late evening, so I'm in Tel Aviv. I'm very happy to be here. As Beth mentioned, I'm a co-founder of Combatants for Peace, and I'm going to share with you tonight or today my two parallel journeys that have been intertwined. One is my journey in life that led me to be a co-founder of Combatants for Peace, and my journey in theater that at that moment something happened to me when I transformed and actually refused to serve in the occupation and the apartheid, and became a theater activist, a theater of the oppressed activist. So usually I begin my story, my personal story, with my grandfather and the Holocaust and the way how my family started as a Zionist family. But today, I think I will start my my personal story, as we do in Combatants for Peace, with my almost first passion in life, that was for theater. So since very, very young age, I knew that I'm going to be a theater practitioner. I was thinking about being an actor. And at the same time, I was a very committed, devoted Jewish Israeli kid to Zionism. As my personal story, as my family story was, like my grandfather was a Zionist in Europe, and he immigrated to Israel and to Zion, and that's how our family survived. So growing in Israel as an all-Israeli Jewish boy means that you are following the footsteps of the pioneers, which means serving in the army. So I prepared myself for these two careers. One of them was, I knew that I'm going to do theater since I was very young. And the other one, I knew that I'm going to be a combatant soldier, and I dreamt of becoming an officer in the army, which in Israel is not a contradiction. You can dream of two things: to be an artist and to be a combatant soldier or an officer at the same time. It's not a contradiction. So I grew up, and I was some kind of an actor kid. I did my first show in first grade. It was the kidnap of an airplane, 1976. You remember probably the Air France flight that was kidnapped by Palestinian organization to Entebbe, Uganda, and the Israeli Special Forces released the hostages, and Yoni Netanyahu was killed in that operation. This was the older brother of Benjamin Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu, the previous and I hope not the future Prime Minister of Israel. So I directed and was acting in this show in the first grade. So that's my first performance. And since then, I knew that I'm going to become a professional actor in Israel. And at the same time, I knew that I'm going to follow my father's footsteps and to join the Israeli army and to become an actor, to become a soldier in the Israeli army. So I joined the army. I served for 4 years because I volunteered for an additional year. All these 4 years in the mandatory service and the additional year was in the first Intifada from 87 to 91. So instead of being the brave soldier that I've dreamed of, saving Israel from the Arab armies invading Israel like in 73, 67, and so on. That was the myth when I joined the army. I find myself doing only occupation policing operations. But like I always say, the never again, this thing that we are, the first role as an Israeli man is to protect your homeland. And it means that whatever a mission in the army is sacred and you have to obey and so on. But so the fuel for never again, and I'm following the pioneers' footsteps, was strong enough to do these actions. But when I was released from the army, it was very clear to me that I'm not going abroad. I'm not going to do the big trip like all my colleagues and friends from the army, but I immediately went to acting school to study theater because I was really, really hungry to do theater. I said, okay, I was 18 years old, a theater person who was very passionate for that. 4 years I invested or contributed to my homeland, to Israel as a soldier and an officer. And now I'm going back to my old dream to become an actor, to become a theater creator. But in Israel, the reality is that even if you're an artist, even you're returning to civil life, you have to serve 1 month a year in reserve duty. And in the reserve duty, I served along the years, each year for a month. So 11 months you are developing yourself as an artist, first as a student, acting student, and 1 month a year you are serving as an officer of a military regime, of military occupation, imposing military regime on 2-3 million Palestinians in Gaza Strip, in West Bank, and so on. And the reality that you live in this month is at the beginning as an acting student, realizing I'm learning Stanislavski through this, that this is a role, I'm playing a role here, it's only 1 month, and then I can return to study theater. And then I graduate acting school and I was accepted to the repertory theater. And I'm already a major in reserve because every year I volunteered for a month and serve as an officer. Each year, I remind you that was the years of Oslo Accord, peace agreement, that we are serving 1 month a year, and we see the expansion of the Jewish settlements, more roadblocks, more checkpoints, and so on. And I reached to a point that one night in 1997, I'm playing a role, a main character in Clifford Odets Awaken Sing in Beersheba Theater. I'm already a professional actor. I don't know if you all know this play, but in this play, it's about the Depression of 1929. a Jewish family in the Bronx. They are falling apart, and this young revolutionary man, I was playing him, Ralph, saying it's about the system. The problem is the system. We are obeying to a false system, the capitalist system, that we can lose everything and we can gain, a fortune of a lot of money one day, and that's the problem of the system, and we should disobey to the system. And he's the black sheep of the family. Nobody listens to him, and it's like a tragedy. This family is falling apart. So I'm taking off my 1929 suit and tie, wearing my major uniform and driving 50 minutes from Beersheba to Gaza Strip to return to my soldiers. And I'm a commander now of a checkpoint in the middle of Gaza Strip. An hour later, a couple with a baby come and they say, we have to go there, we have to go to the hospital. And I say, you don't have a permit, you have to go back. And they said, the baby is sick. And I'm saying no, because these are the orders. So that's a first story, a first lesson of Stanislavski. Here you're a character, you're working with your own material. Here you're, here, in the theater, in the aesthetic space, you are playing a role and everything is legitimate. And here in life, it's not theater, it's reality, and there are different rules. But something in my soul and something in my conscience saying to me that this is wrong. So to make a long story short, because I have few encounters like this that I had with reality and with the art that transformed me, it took me some years. And in 2000, and every year, 11 months, I'm an artist, I'm an actor, I'm starting to direct. I'm feeling that I'm doing my role as an artist in a democratic state. Then 1 month, a year, I'm playing the other role. So then I reached the point that I couldn't do this anymore. And I wasn't alone. We wrote a letter. We became what we called the Combatants letter, later on Courage to Refuse. We refused to serve the occupation and the apartheid. I was sentenced to jail for a month for that. And when I was released from prison, I couldn't go back to the repertory theater. I understood that doing this kind of art for me was actually doing what I did in reserve duty, perpetuating, preserving the system, silencing myself from not only being critical of the system, but actually starting a movement or a motion an action to change the reality. So this kind of art for me was preserving the reality and not changing it. So I was released from jail. I left the repertory theater. I was lost. I didn't know what to do. I was very active in the uni-national Courage to Refuse movement, convincing the Israeli society that the occupation and the destruction of Israel, of the democratic state, of Zionism, of the shelter, of all these words. And then after a year that we were campaigning and addressing our message to the Israeli society, and I was lost in theater. I was lost in my life. I started to do some workshops, to do lectures. I didn't know what to do, and I was preserving my children's shows in order to make a living. And then I went to the Tel Aviv University, and I thought maybe I will change my life, leave theater and do something else. I assigned to many departments in Tel Aviv University, and I found myself in the theater department eventually. And in the first semester, I went to the library, and I was like, in an American sitcom, I just, when the books are falling next to the lockers, and they are looking at each other and they are falling in love in 1 minute. That's what happened to me with the books of Augusto Boal. I thought he's like Stanislavski and Artaud and all these dead myths, but I realized that he is alive. So I started to learn from the books. And at the same time, I was starting to work with youth, with Jews and Arabs, because I was already I became an activist. And then someone told us, the refuseniks, the people who refused to serve the occupation, that there is a parallel group in the Palestinian society, people like us who are credited with high ranks in Palestine. High rank is sitting 10 years in Israeli jail and so on. So we started to meet with them secretly, because it was 2004. It was the very intense second intifada, a lot of retaliations of the Israeli army on cities and Palestinian towns, a lot of suicide attacks and bombs and attacks on Israeli citizens. And in the meantime, I'm doing kind of theater that I'm developing my new journey with theater, with Jews and Arabs youth, with Israeli in state prisons, which are, in Israeli prisons, half of the criminal prisoners are Arab Israelis, Arab citizens. Not to mention the thousands of political Palestinian prisoners that are not allowed to do theater, they don't get vacation, they don't have any education programs, and so on. So I'm starting to do this, and then we founded Combatants for Peace in the movement Combatants for Peace, with Jewish Israelis who were like myself, who refused to serve the occupation and abandoned the way of violence, and the parallel group in Palestine. But still my uninational psyche and my theatrical artistic psyche is working on separations. The fact that I couldn't integrate the Ralph, the main character, and Chen, the officer, into one person, and was still the same symptom that I had, that I couldn't integrate the Chen, the activist, Chen, the theater person, and Combatants for Peace. So I did a lot of work of integration, to integrate different characters inside me, the artist and the activist, the patient in therapy and the director, and other characters that I have inside me. And all of a sudden I realized that I have to integrate all these characters in the movement of Combatants for Peace, to take the various techniques that I've already learned with Augusto Boal and others, and to implement them, to incorporate them in Combatants for Peace. And I realized that something is not working, because Theater of the Oppressed of Augusto Boal was initiated or founded by Augusto Boal with homogeneous communities, for homogeneous oppressed communities. So I won't go into a lot of introduction about what is Theater of the Oppressed, because we are here to talk about how we took Augusto Boal, the Brazilian thinker and director who started in the 1960s in Brazil, his theater, in order to resist the military dictatorship, and how he has developed it as we call it, as the research is calling it, activist therapeutic theater. But what I want to share with you is how I implemented it in Combatants for Peace, and something in this homogeneous model didn't fit, because I was passionate about working with polarized group. First, Combatants for Peace, Israelis and Palestinians. And then I started to expand my practice into prisoners and non-prisoners, youth and adults, men and women, refugees and citizens, and so on. So what I realized that our journey in Combatants for Peace, that is actually, again, two parallel paths. One is the dialogue, the reconciliation, the rehumanization, and on one journey that we've developed in our movement, how we are dialogue, reconcile, and rehumanize each other through personal stories and through the memorial ceremony and through many, many practices of actually, I would say, rehumanizing each other. And the parallel path is how we are developing a binational community that is resisting the occupation non-violently, develop creative ways of resisting and opposing the occupation and the apartheid. And what we realized since almost day one that we implemented and applied theater of the oppressed, that theater is a perfect tool, a perfect technique, perfect method, perfect medium to actually work on these two on these two journeys or these two purposes. So we started to develop it since 2007. We've developed, we implemented and applied theater for these two purposes: the dialogue, the reconciliation, and the rehumanization. And we can say psychological, emotional, therapeutic modes of theater. And on the one, and the other hand, we've developed all the technique of Augusto Boal, and I mean all of them, and I will shortly will show you what it means, these techniques, in order to resist the occupation, to mock the occupation, to create creative direct actions against the occupation in roadblocks, in checkpoints, confronting the settlements and the settlers, confronting Israeli army forces, and so on. What we found out through theater and other means in the memorial Israeli-Palestinian ceremony, in these direct actions, in forum theater, in image theater performances and demonstrations, in working with invisible theater, which is creating some kind of a guerrilla attacks in reality, that these two parallel paths are not really parallel. They are intertwined. They are nurturing each other. So it's kind of, you know, a common knowledge when you put Israelis and Palestinians in one room, either for theater or for other purposes, there is an immediate competition, you know, who's more moral, who's more just. And the Israelis always say, let's leave politics outside, let's just be human being. The oppressed or the Palestinians are always saying, no, politics is part of our lives. So how we deal with theater in order to allow Israelis and Palestinians to engage in these processes, in order to develop and to process, and to get out of this, traps of who's more just, who's more moral, who's more ready for combatants for peace, and so on. So I want to show just few images just to realize what it means when I'm talking about theater outside. All what I'm going to see are just images of direct action, of forum theater, of opposing the occupation. Some of them will be examples of I would say more emotional and psychological work that we do. more of reconciliation, but it's just very, I would say very quick images, not really, we won't delve into the depth of it or the deep processes that we went in, just to have some, a visual image of what it means. And then I will be happy to open up some kind of a discussion or a dialogue that we will be able to answer questions or to elaborate more on the comments. So the first thing that I want to show is we're not going in a synchronic way, or we're not going to be linear in time, but we're going to jump in time. So I want to start with an example of not of Theater of the Oppressed, but an elaboration of Theater of the Oppressed, working with images, with the polarized model, how we work with images, how we work with inviting the occupation to perform itself in front of us in order to make it visible. As Augusto Boal used to say, one of the aims of Theater of the Oppressed is to make oppression, the invisible oppression, to make it visible. So I want to show you one excerpt from the film Disturbing the Peace. We chose one of our operation, one of our action against the occupation, and then we'll talk about it. So just tell me if you see and hear, Gili, and if not, we'll see what. Do you see that?
Yeah, I see it. I see it well. Let's try the sound.
Okay.
Perfect.
هلا بلغوني انه في جيش بالمنطقه، وهذا الشيء عماله بعيد كل الترتيبات اللي بنسويها. يعني عمالنا بنشتغل على الشيء المفاجئ اللي راح يكون موجود في الشارع في المنطقه.
שתיים, רשת פיצה. אז אני אומרת, התכנסנו פה היום.
I look at these walls and I'm thinking, these walls perpetuate the fears that generated them to begin with.
The thing that separates us is a metaphor as well. It's a symbol of our will to be together. And we are going to use it.
ישראלים מגיעים לחלק של החומה ממערב, פלסטינים מגיעים ממזרח, ואנחנו הולכים פשוט להיפגש כשאנחנו רואים אלה את אלה משני צידי הגדר.
התכנסנו כאן היום, האומות המאוחדות, לדון בהצעה, קבלה או דחייה של הצעה למדינה פלסטינית. רוסיה. כן! שוודיה. כן! הולנד. כן!
אנחנו נגיד כן גם לעצמנו, כי העול של המשטר הצבאי הוא עולנו, לא רק עולם.
ישראל. ישראל! ישראל!
הגדר. הם רחוקים מהגדר. הם רחוקים מהגדר. זוהי הפגנה לא אלימה! זוהי הפגנה לא אלימה! הגדר לא תפריד אותנו! הגדר לא תפריד אותנו! הגדר לא תפריד אותנו!
שימו לב מאיפה האלימות מגיעה. יש פה שני צדדים לא אלימים, ישראלים ופלסטינים שרוצים להיות ביחד, ושימו לב מי כלוא בין הגדרות. All of a sudden they seem to me like prisoners, that they are trapped in this space, forced to play their role and imprisoned in violence and hatred.
אנחנו מזמינים את כוחות הביטחון לפשוט את המדים ולהצטרף אלינו.
We always keep the door open to that there is an alternative to what you're doing now. We believe in transformation. And we believe the transformation can occur even in these radical or extreme situations of violence, because it happened to us.
Right, you're back.
Okay, yeah, I'm back. I just had to stop there. So I've screened this because I think it's in a nutshell, although it's not theater of the oppressed per se, as we say, it's a more of a bread and puppet technique, and you know, the big puppets and so on. But the structure, this scene was generated in order to make the occupation visible, in order to create this image that I think holds all the military regime in the occupation and the apartheid system and so on. So that's one image that I just wanted to share with you. But this is one of the latest developments of our work. We started in a very, I would say, basic techniques of theater of the oppressed. As I've said, a lot of training, because theater of the oppressed work with the non-actors. So to transform the activists of the movement, the Israelis and the Palestinians, from activists to become non-actors who are actors. It deals with a lot of indoors working and training and so on. And I want to show you another example of one of our very early interventions. So it's I will show it, and then maybe I will show it without a sound, so then I can explain what you see here. Just a second. Okay. Tell me, Gili, just tell me if you see it without sound, because I'm going to explain what we see. Do you see this?
Yep. Yep, I see it.
Okay, so just a second. So in Theater of the Oppressed, we are performing in forum theater scenes of oppression that were personal stories that were told by the oppressed, by the protagonists, as we call them. And this is a true story that we heard from Palestinian about this is the road to the Jewish settlements of Neh Hefetz, and we are just standing in the edge of village Shufa, and it's about a grandchild who has to take his grandfather back to the village from the hospital after an operation. And this is the grandchild. This is the. Do you see where I marked?
Yep, I see. We see the arrow. Yeah.
Or the arrow. So this is the grandchild. This is the grandfather. This is another grandchild. This is an Israeli soldier, and this is an Israeli officer. This is a Palestinian actor, an Israeli actor, a Palestinian actor, an Israeli actor, and a Palestinian actor. So we always mixed the casting. It's always a mixed casting. So the story is very simple. The protagonist trying to pass through the roadblock, to pass his grandfather, like very short walking distance to the village, and the soldiers are preventing him from walking back to the village, and they are asking him to do the detour of 26 kilometers, but because this is the law, this is the order, and so on. So as I said, Munir is playing the officer, Eyal is playing the soldier, and what is happening is that we are presenting the scene once, and then we are presenting the scene again, and we're asking the audience, the spectators, to become spect actors, to shout stop when they see a moment that they can replace the main character, the grandchild, and to replace him, to come up on stage and to take an action instead of him, in his shoes. But what happens sometimes, that's the regular form theater mode, as Augusto Boal shaped it. But what is happening when you do it in the real site, in a site specific, when the real oppression took place, that the army forces are intervening in places that you didn't plan. So what you're going to see now is that we started the mode of forum theater, and they are playing the scene, but all of a sudden, a real colonel is invading the stage. You see this real colonel, and he's going to arrest the actor who's playing the colonel for contaminating or to make, he's making fun of the Israeli uniform, the Israeli army uniform, which considered to him is a criminal act. So we are trying to convince him not to arrest Munir. Munir's child, 6 years old, is in the audience, burst into tears at that moment. You see a police officer as well. And they are saying we have to arrest Munir because he is violating the law. He's not allowing to wear uniform, Israeli uniform. So I came up as a joker with a compromise. I say, okay, so we will play the theater scene without the uniform. And after a long negotiation, they allowed us to go on with the show. And I asked the actors to go back to the forum theater to play the scene again. And what we said to the audience is that, again, we use them as audience, the soldiers, and we said, we have imagination. We now can imagine Munir and Eyal, Israeli officer and soldiers, you see, without uniform, because we have an imagination and we can imagine a different future. We can imagine a different present, what the soldiers cannot. But we invite them to join us to imagine different future. So as you see, these are the Israelis and the Palestinian audience, polarized model sitting from the village and Israelis. Polarized model is looking at the scenery, but at the same time, they are looking at the backdrop, which is the soldiers and the occupation and so on. So just to return to the image, the vision, or make visible the occupation, make an action which is inviting the oppression to present itself and so on, and to create an intervention in the reality which transforms all the participants, all the actors of the aesthetic space and the reality at the same time. Another example, I will skip the example, maybe I will use it. I have so many examples, so many images to show you. I always show only a minor percentage of what I prepared, but I would really be happy now to open up for a discussion, for a dialogue, and then through the answers, maybe I will able to show more images. But I think you have now the general picture of how we work, or what was the first years of working and how we implement or apply. I just want to share one thing, just to have, I know it will be just to have an image of how I see it, or how I see the polarized model of theater of the oppressed, it's a process of three processes. So I know it's not very clear, but this diagram, if someone is interested, I can send it out later, of course. But the main idea is to see that these three processes. So the main process is the polarized group process, the Israelis and the Palestinians together working with form theater, image theater, games, and all the techniques that are actually applied in a polarized model. But we always live in Combatants for Peace. You see the polar group A, homogeneous process. We always leave room for both theatrical and social and political and activist process uninationally to work separately from the other group, from polar group B that is working uninationally. We work in this side, we are working on the, as I said, track A, or the journey of humanization, emotional and psychological and therapeutic process. It's all here. And the other process is the more political, activist, direct action, resisting the occupation, which is on this side. And I will leave it here because maybe through this scheme, I will explain more from the in the Q&A mode. So Gili, take it from here.
Thank you so much, Chen. There's a lot of really, really great questions. I want to mention two things before we go to the, I'll try to lump them out together. But before we go, just two things. You saw a clip from Disturbing the Peace, which is a great film. A lot of people are asking, where can they see more of this? And I suggest you watch the film. I'm going to put the link and you can search where you can watch it. So it's got a lot more of this, and you can watch it. And the second thing, but just before I go to the questions, is that the movement Combatants for Peace has really just released a statement about the raid against the 6 human rights Palestinian NGOs. The office has been raided and shut down. This is a huge outrage, and we have a statement. I'll put it. Look at the link, and we'll also publicize that. So, Theater of the Oppressed deals a lot with the power dynamics and imbalance of power, and it does it really well. And a lot of questions here seem to be about, if you can give us a sense of how that dealing with power dynamics through theater in the movement itself. How do the audience processes after it happened? How does the actors process these experiences within the movement and within the struggle against the occupation more broadly? And there's a question about if you can elaborate a little bit about the difference between a classical, more classical theater of the oppressed, like you say, homogeneous, into this version that is adapted to joint work. So there's a lot of question in that vein. If you can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question: the power dynamic of the reality and how it is being processed or dealt in Combatants for Peace, because it's kind of a paradox. We are creating an equal power dynamic movement in an unequal and unbalanced reality, where in the reality there is one side who is occupying the other, oppressing the other, and so on. So I won't go into details of how we've developed through this journey, how we've developed our mechanism of, Israeli coordinator, Palestinian coordinator, Israeli treasurer, Palestinian treasurer, and all this balanced. And I will explain it through some examples from theater, but I will say that we are constantly aware of the unbalanced reality and the power structure of the occupation, economically, socially, politically, everything. It's not only resources, it's more deep, it's deeper than that. But being aware of this creates all the time this tension of two realities, like in theater, that we know we are aware of the reality and we are playing a game of utopian space in Combatants for Peace, trying to reach this, trying to fulfill, to embody, and to play out this utopian world, the utopian Israel and Palestine that we want to be and to see in the future. But as I've mentioned, there is no such platform or medium as theater to live this metaxis, these two existences at the same time, to realize that we are observing the reality, even in Combatants for Peace, differently. And I will give an example from forum theater. From this scene that I've shown, that I've screened of the grandchild and the grandfather, and how we see the same action, the same scene, and we see different things. We played it in another forum, not this one that I've shown. And there were no soldiers around us. It was only Israelis and Palestinians on stage, only Israelis and Palestinians in the audience. And we opened up for a forum theater, and we showed the scene, and I said, when you're ready to replace the character, shout stop. And one Palestinian guy from the village of Shufa shouted stop, and he replaced it, the grandchild. He had an intervention, he had an idea, like we're doing forum theater. I said, you can do whatever you want on stage. It's an open space for any intervention. So he replaced the grandchild, and he started to beat up the three actors who were playing the soldiers, and really beating up, not in a representational way, not in an artistic way. It started to be violent, and we shout, stop, stop, and he couldn't stop. He was into his mission, into his role, and so on. And, you know, it was like very frightening, very surprising. And of course, the Palestinian actors were the one who managed to stop him from being. So the first question I asked him, that did you manage to bring your grandfather back home? And he said, no, I didn't, but I preserved my dignity. I preserved my pride. And all the Palestinians were applauding him, and all the Israelis were laughing in embarrassment. So I asked, what do you have to say? The Israelis, the audience was polarized, half Israelis, half Palestinians. And all the Israelis were referring to this intervention as violent. And all the Palestinians were saying, no, this is not violent. The violence is the soldiers who are preventing him with their weapons to take his grandfather back home. So even this discussion about whether it was, we saw the same action, the same intervention. Half of them say it was violent. Half of them say it wasn't violent. So this discussion or this processing of the same action that was represented on stage, and it wasn't artistic, it was very frightening for a lot of people. It was very appalling to a lot of people. Creating another intervention by an Israeli woman who said, I want to intervene, I want to replace the character. And she went on stage and she took her grandfather and brother in the scene further down the hill. She put them in a remote place from the checkpoint. She said, I don't want you to confront the soldiers. She came to the soldiers. She went down on her knees, you say? No, Berkaim. Knees. And she was begging and crying, please let me pass, let me take my grandfather back home. Please, please, please. And all the Israelis were applauding her. And all the Palestinians were like, you know, laughing in embarrassment from this intervention. And I said, did you manage to bring your grandfather? She said, no, but I just wanted to do this intervention in order to make a point to the Palestinians, so that whatever is happening for us, violent is is not an option. And all the Palestinians were referring to this intervention as, something that is ridiculous. You won't find a Palestinian that will do such a thing. This is disrespectful for the Palestinian people. This is an illegitimate intervention, illegitimate interaction. So I give it as an example of how through the action, through the intervention, through the representation, we are dealing with how we see the imbalanced situation in the reality and how we are processing, dialoguing, and listen to each other, not only in order to rehumanize each other or to engage in a dialogue, but to find new ways to resist the occupation and to be partners and allies in the same journey of bringing an end to the occupation.
Thank you, Chen. We have a couple of questions in the line of exactly what you kind of touched on right now, the relationship between dialogue groups and the activism, and also how do you deal with normalization, issues around normalization that surround joint work like that? What's the dynamic around the connections between dialogue and activism and questions of normalization, what is and what isn't a normalization?
First, I have to say that I totally understand and identify with the anti-normalization movement in Palestine, in the occupied territories. I totally understand it as a thing that we have to resist. But I have to say that like BDS and other, I would say, tactical tools, normalization is an ideal image for me. I mean, normalization, as Bassam Aramin always says, this is our main goal. This is our vision, to normalize the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. Of course, it is forbidden to do that, or it is counterproductive to do it under oppression. When one side, like one Palestinian told me, when the Israelis say to the Palestinians, let's talk, let's dialogue, let's have dialogue groups, let's just engage in a dialogue, let's just be human beings. And the Palestinians say, once he demonstrated it, he said, okay, I'll show you through an image. So he was on the floor. He asked the Israeli woman who said that to put her boot on his neck. And he said, this is how I feel, that your boot is on my neck and you're asking me to dialogue with you. You want a dialogue? Take off your boot off my neck, and then we can have a dialogue. So that's another image that I understood, or Israelis understand this image of why you cannot, why you have to resist normalization while the Israeli boot is on the Palestinian neck. Nobody can dialogue why he or she has a boot on her neck. But this is the simple answer. The more complicated answer is that we have to define when it's a tactical tool, where now we are normalizing, now we are resisting normalization, and when we are doing some action and activities that are serving the long-term cause or the long vision of we want to live in normal relationship, equal relationship, and so on. And again, we use a lot of theater to do that, to define, to fine-tune what it means when it's normalization and when it is not. We always laugh, we do a direct action against the occupation. We get rubber bullets, we are choking from tear gas, we are confronting the occupation, and then when everything ends, we go to the village and we are drinking coffee and eating hummus together. Or there is always a joke, we say, is this a normalization to eat together after we confront the occupation? There are no simple answer to this question.
Thank you, Chen. Yes, these are always complicated. There's a couple of questions about the process. Is it always site-specific? who writes the scripts? How do you come up with the particular performances? Who are the audience, and what's intended? What's the intended effect? You touched on it before of these performances. So a little bit about the process of making a theater, using theater this way within the movement, and
Yeah.
actors, Palestinian actors playing soldiers and Israeli actors playing Palestinians. A little bit about the kind of the making of the sausage.
Making of a sausage. I like this expression. I'm vegetarian, by the way. But maybe I have to here, at this point, I have to add another circle, because I'm talking about the polarized model of as a model of Israelis and Palestinians only, but it's not true. I mean, all of you, most of you are kind of spectators to our conflict, to the occupation, to the apartheid. And one of the reasons that I'm doing this talk is that I want to convince you that you are not spectators, that we see you in Combatants for Peace as actors. We want you to come up on stage and to replace the characters and to take an action, not only in the aesthetic space, but in the reality as well. So I have to add here one circle that I didn't mention yet, which is the work that we are doing theatrically in Combatants for Peace outside of Israel and Palestine. And I want to give one example for that, because I think it says something about the development of the, Israeli-Palestinian work. We learned it from South Africa, from North Ireland, that all these conflicts were only, within themselves. And when they took off their gaze and to the horizon, they saw that there are other conflicts around the world that they can learn from. So when we realized that after a few years that we were stuck in ourselves, we decided to do forum theater as an image and in reality outside. So the theater group toured around the world and did forum theater in UK, in Netherlands, in various places in Europe. And I want to give one example in the Netherlands, that we've created the forum scene for the Dutch audience, the Dutch spectators. So we prepared scenes, forum scenes about Israelis and Palestinians as protagonists who are under oppression, the Palestinians examples from the occupation of the apartheid, Israelis and activists, the oppression that we get as Israeli activists against the occupation. And we've created one scene for the international community. And we wanted to do a forum theater for them, but we had another idea, and I will explain it, to do an invisible theater within the forum theater. So what we did was we've created a forum scene. Maayan, an Israeli activist, and Suleiman Khatib, one of the co-founders, who was an actor back in the scene, they are preparing the Israeli-Palestinian memorial service together. Maayan is coming to Ramallah to meet Suli at his home to prepare the ceremony, and all of a sudden Suli's sister is entering the room and saying to Suli that she's not accepting the fact that an Israeli is in her house. She asked him to take him out of the house, and she says that Suli is actually collaborating with the occupation and so on. Next scene, Suli and Maayan are taking a Dutch activist that is coming to help the ceremony, and they are taking her to Ramallah. She's helping with the Israeli-Palestinian ceremony. Again, the sister is coming in the room, and she now ignored the Israeli and activists and trying to convince the Dutch activist who is coming to help Combatants for Peace, to support Combatants for Peace, to abandon Combatants for Peace and to join her, the BDS and the anti-occupation BDS movement, and not to work with Israelis and Palestinians who are working together. And this is the scene. When the protagonist becomes the Dutch activist who have now to choose between BDS and working with Combatants for Peace. the ending of these forum scenes always end with a dilemma of the protagonist, what to do now, how to solve the problem, like in epic theater, an open ending, not the closure of tragedy or of a comedy, you know. So we're ending up with a dilemma. So we did this proper forum theater in a polarized way. You know, they can replace the Israeli activist, the Palestinian activist, they can replace the Dutch activist and so on. But we add another component to this, and that after a few interventions of the Dutch spect actors, Maayan, the Israeli actor, and Rima, the Palestinian actor who is playing the sister of Suli, started to arguing, and they started to argue about the intervention, and this Rima is talking for the BDS, and Maayan is trying to shut her up. He said, "This is not our message. We're combatants for peace," and it becomes more and more fury, and then they become violent. She's throwing a chair on him. He's throwing a chair to her. He leaves the stage, and she's trying to preach to the audience against him. And what we realize is that what happens in this invisible theater, it was all scripted and I'm answering how we are scripting these scenes. It's all written and directed and acting very accurately, both the violence and the embarrassment of the Dutch original actor and the host who invited us. But what we realized after I shout freeze, and everybody's freeze on stage except from the spect actor, and Maayan and Rima are shaking hands and hugging on stage, and I said this was our last invisible theater scene. The spectators are first shocked, then they released, and then when we process this, they say very interesting things. They said, we were regretting coming here. We said, oh, these barbarians from the Middle East, they cannot handle 1 hour without violence on stage. They said, oh, we don't want to intervene in this ugly. It was very nice and well put and aesthetic, and now it becomes ugly. We don't want to take part in it. They say, we were waiting for you, the leader, to solve the problem. And when you didn't solve it, we thought, who's going to lead a solution here, and so on. All the things that we see in the international community were presented by the passivity of the audience and how they reflect on it and why they didn't take part in it, why they didn't invade the stage, why they were trying to rescue the spect actor who was on stage, the Dutch woman who were embarrassed, and so on. So the invisible theater in the forum theater allowed us to reflect to the Dutch audience what is their new role, how they can process and reflect on their activity, passivity. What are the options to take part in this when it becomes ugly, when it becomes violent, and so on. So that was another development of the forum theater, of how we can invite the international community or people who are not actors in this, direct actors in this conflict, to take part, to take an active part, creative and imaginary part in resolving, bringing an end to the occupation and the apartheid.
Thank you so much, Chen. That is so fascinating. It's really an extraordinary ability of theater to reflect humanity back at us and kind of have the ability. The Combatants for Peace movement does a lot of different things and different campaigns. And thank you for joining us. There's huge amount of questions and interest in this particular perspective. So we hope to have another a conversation about this particular approach with a Palestinian speaker. We were supposed to have a Palestinian speaker from the movement. It just didn't work out, but we hope so keep an eye on your emails, and we'll hope to have another conversation soon because of the interest. And obviously, I'm so sorry we didn't get to a lot of really, really great questions about this fascinating work and working jointly, Israelis and Palestinians against the occupation. Is why I strongly support the Combatants for Peace movement and very proud to serve on the board. Thank you for everybody who joined us. Please keep an eye for the emails about future events, future campaigns, and statements that the movement issues for us on social media. And thank you so much for joining us today. And Chen, thank you so much for the insight and truly fascinating work and so important to all the people in the land. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. I was very happy to be here with you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you soon in future events. Thank you. And thank you, Beth, our fearless executive director.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is great. We'll definitely do more of these. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.